So if you own and operate a business in Canada and you have a GST number, how do you get a secondary GST number and why would you get one? Well, in this video, that's what I'm going to discuss, how to get that secondary GST number and some situations in which you might want to get a secondary number. So for starters, GST stands for Goods and Services Tax. That's a federal tax here in Canada that businesses charge on the sale of most goods and most services. And if you have a business and you're not sure if you need to charge it, it depends on the size of the business, the nature of the business, and what goods or services are being sold. But I recommend looking into that just to make sure that you are set up, charging it, collecting it, and remitting it if you need to. And if you need help wrapping your head around the whole GST thing, feel free to reach out. I do offer a free 1-hour initial consultation, and that can be booked on my website, which I will leave the link to in the video description below. Now, that being said, if you already have a GST account, you have a GST number, you're already operating a business, charging it and collecting it, why would you want a secondary number? Well, some of the main reasons would be if you have kind of different sections of your business or multiple businesses, especially tied to a sole proprietor, where you kind of want to keep those filings separate and keep the, bookkeeping separate. So for example, let's say you start a business as a sole proprietor and, your business is photography and you do whatever, wedding photography. And then later on, you kind of start a secondary business or engage in another business activity, something that's quite different, like, you're building websites or you're doing cleaning or something like that. If you are a sole proprietor and you're operating that photography business and you're already a GST registrant and you're collecting it, then when you start secondary businesses or engage in secondary business activity as a sole proprietor, then typically you're required to start charging GST right away on those services, assuming they're not GST exempt services. And so in a case like that, you might want a secondary GST number. And now your GST number is basically your federal business number with RT001 added to the end. So if you wanted to open a secondary GST account, you don't actually open a secondary account, you just get a secondary GST number, and that would be your federal business number followed by RT002. And typically the way it's set up is that each entity, whether that's a human entity or a corporation, has one federal business number, and then they can have multiple GST numbers tied to that business number or that business account. So another example would be, let's say you have a corporation, and in the corporation you have, business activity. Let's say you have like a restaurant or a mini golf course or something like that. And then you also separately have property that you're renting out. And so you're collecting GST on the property, but you're also collecting GST on the services from the restaurant or the mini golf course or something like that. In that case, if both those things are operating under one corporation, that's another scenario in which you might want a secondary GST number, one for the operations activity and then one for the property rental if that corporation owns property. So it's not necessary to have a secondary GST number, but it can be good on your end, the business owner, just to help kind of keep things separate and file separate GST filings, if that's going to be easier for you to do your accounting and bookkeeping. And if you do set up a secondary GST number tied to your federal business number, you can connect that with a different email address, different bank account, different business address, things like that. Now, if you do find yourself in that situation where it makes sense to get a secondary GST number, how do you actually do that? Well, I find the best way to do that is just to call into the CRA business line, and they will assist you with that and help you create a secondary GST number that's tied to your MyCRA business account. So hopefully this video is helpful. This is something that I did recently myself, and I just found it wasn't that easy to navigate in terms of finding information and how to actually set it up. So I did call in. They were able to help me and tell me the best way to go about doing that in the future. So if you got any value from the video, please click like and feel free to check out my YouTube channel here, where I have over 250 videos that cover business management and business startup topics.